Okay. Here come folks now.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. And before I forget, let's make sure that all right. Welcome in, everybody. My name is Nick Hool. We're just going to wait a minute or two here to let folks file in from the waiting room. But if you wouldn't mind putting your name and where you're calling in from to get the conversation started in the chat, that would be great. And once we've got more of a quorum going, we'll get things really rolling. And I'll get that conversation started. Okay. Another minute or so, and then I'll give my housekeeping spiel. All right, now that we've got a couple more folks in, if you wouldn't mind tossing your name and where you're calling in from in the chat, that you should find that along the bottom of your Zoom window. That'd be great just to get the conversation started. But a little bit about today's presentation. As I said at the start, my name is Nick Hool. I'm the Director of Client Engagement here at the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. Basically, that means I help out with things like today's event. I am kind of the MC, if you will. So Gary will be our primary presenter here, and I'll let him get started in just a moment. But if you have any questions during the presentation, you can toss those in the chat, and we have a break in the middle, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end as well. You can feel free to toss those. Hi, Joe. The chat should be enabled for everyone now. There we go. Thank you, Joe. Sorry about that, everyone. The chat, for whatever reason, was defaulted to disabled. There we go. All right, so we've got some folks chiming in now. Here's Joe joining us from Tyrone, Pennsylvania. Eva from Charleston, South Carolina. Eva, welcome, welcome. Daniel from Corinth, Texas. Awesome. Gabriel
Manila.
from Manila, Philippines. Fantastic. Welcome, welcome. I don't know the exact time difference, but it must be fairly late for you there. So welcome for this late evening conversation. Pam from Durban,
welcome.
South Africa. Welcome. Fantastic. All right. Well, as you heard when you joined, this presentation is being recorded. So we will share that recording as well as the slides with everyone within 24 hours of the presentation concluding. So feel free to sit back and take it all in and come up with any questions that you have throughout. Like I mentioned just a second ago, we will be taking a break in the middle to answer some questions. I'll read those out for anyone who can't see them or things of that nature. So no worries there. Feel free to drop those questions in at any time. Could be about anything either in the presentation or other questions unrelated to the presentation that you might have. No problems there. And I see Gary just enabled the closed captions. So if you need assistance with maybe we're talking too fast or something like that, you can feel free to read those as well. All right. Well, Gary, how about you take it away, seeing as we're about 4 minutes past.
Sounds good, Nick. Thank you. Thanks for the startup, Nick. Thanks for your assistance here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I am delighted to share with you all some of what I've learned about the entrepreneurial mindset, how to cultivate it in ourselves and others. So let's just jump in here. So the name of this webinar is Cultivating Entrepreneurial Mindsets in Classrooms, Organizations, and Communities. And this is a topic I've been focused on for more than 30 years. Trying to deconstruct the entrepreneurial mindset as a framework for thinking that can empower ordinary people to do extraordinary things. I created a company in 2007 called the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, we have become the world's leading provider of entrepreneurial mindset education, training, professional and organizational development. That's what we do. We offer a whole host of training programs for educators, for organizational leaders around the entrepreneurial mindset. So, where are we? The world has changed in ways that now require all of us to think like entrepreneurs. That's the basic premise here. That's the why.
Hey, Gary.
Yes, sir.
You have not shared your slides if you are reading slides.
Why, thank you, Nick.
Yes. Also, before we get too far off the rails, we were going to open things up with a poll just to start to learn a little bit about our audience more in depth. So I'll go ahead and launch that now while you get those slides started.
You got it, Nick. We're off to a terrible start already.
No, it's fine. All right, folks, I just launched a poll, so you should see a secondary pop-up come up with 5 questions. So if you are, I'm sorry, 4 questions. So if you see that, make sure to scroll down. You'll see all of the questions in one window, and we'll just leave that open for about a minute. Get some folks. All right, we've got 2 of 13 folks, now 3 of 13. So if you feel up for it, feel free to answer those questions.
Very helpful to us.
Yeah, very helpful, both for the specific event, but also for future events, just tailoring it to the audience, make sure it's relevant for folks.
Yeah,
right,
appreciate all of you. 10. We're down to 10, Nick. We got 3 more to go. We got 11. Ooh. Okay, let's see if we can pull it over the line and get
it's
all
like a
13.
Horse race. It's very exciting.
Right. Right. Okay, we got 11.
Okay.
Let's see.
Just to be mindful of time, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share these results now. So for the first question, what type of organization are folks working from? We've got 1 person from K-12 education in the States. That's the pre-secondary, that's the primary education. Higher education, we've got 3 folks, 3 more folks from nonprofit, 1 business owner or leader, and then some business and entrepreneurship ecosystem support folks, as well as a few folks who consider themselves other. Very interested to hear what you may call yourself. Currently teaching entrepreneurship. So 3 folks are currently teaching entrepreneurship, and the rest of the respondents are not. So that's very interesting. Excited to hear about what you want to get out of this presentation. If you're open to it, we'd love to hear from you in the chat about that. What are you most interested in? Entrepreneurial professional development, 3 folks said that. Entrepreneurship programs, 1 person said that, and most folks, 7 out of the 11 respondents said both. So that's fantastic. Very helpful for us. We're going to be talking about both programs and professional development here in just a moment. And then, how did you hear about us? A friend or colleague, 2 folks said that. Email promotion, 5 folks said that. Social media, 2 said that, and other 2 folks said that. So thank you all. That's super helpful. And without further ado, then I suppose we may as well continue. Gary, I'm still not seeing your slides. I don't know if you were waiting to share those. There we go.
I am.
There you
go.
Let's
see if I can get that. Okay, we good to go?
Yep. Onward and upward.
Okay, how do I got it. Can you, this Windows. Okay, so where are we now? Like, this is kind of the why. The world has changed in ways that now require all of us to think like entrepreneurs. I don't mean to say that we all need to start businesses. That's a really important distinction. An entrepreneurial mindset can certainly increase the probability of success, but we want to talk about it in broader terms, beyond just the limitations of startups. So that's how we're thinking about it. So, if you're an entrepreneurship educator, don't worry. I mean, this is definitely for you, but I also want you to think about the broader implications beyond just the startup world. And part of what I'm saying is that these are the attitudes and skills the world now demands. These are the attitudes and skills that employers demand, right? When we look at entrepreneurials, it's my new term to describe anyone who's embraced this way of thinking, what we see are people who are creative and critical thinkers. These are people who can identify and solve problems They can mobilize resources and make things happen when the rules aren't clear, when the path is not well defined. They can function amidst ambiguity, complexity, and change. They possess the attitudes and skills that the world now demands. They possess the attitudes and skills that we not only want to develop in ourselves, but that we'd like to see in our children, our students, our workforce, and our communities. I'm finding, academic papers that are saying, the entrepreneur is perhaps the most important player in the modern economy. The problems are that we really don't understand entrepreneurship that well. So what I'd like to address in this webinar, what is an entrepreneurial mindset? Why is it important? I think I already kind of hit that briefly, but how can we develop it in ourselves and others? That's really the big question, right? 2008, I got hired by the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute in San Jose to do a gap analysis on the entrepreneurship education ecosystem in North America. And as an entrepreneur myself, as a lifelong entrepreneur, I quickly saw the disparity in this research between the way entrepreneurship is typically characterized in a classroom and what a typical entrepreneur is actually doing. And I went back to Cisco and I said, basically my first impression was, as I just said, there's this enormous disparity. And they said, well, what is the typical entrepreneur actually doing? And, there was some data at the time, but not a lot. And so Cisco gave me the platform to go across the United States and interview about 200, what I would call typical entrepreneurs. I'm not really interested in the mindset and the methods of Elon Musk or Richard Branson or Mark Zuckerberg. We wanted to see what a typical entrepreneur is actually doing. These are people that might not have big ideas. They might not be Stanford MBAs. They might not have access to venture capital, yet somehow they're managing to identify, evaluate, and bring new ideas to life. So that's where it sort of began for me. And one of the entrepreneurs I interviewed is Clifton Talbert, who's one of the founders of Stairmaster. He's also a Pulitzer nominee. He and I wrote this book called Who Owns the Ice House? 8 Life Lessons from an Unlikely Entrepreneur, that really brings forth 8 concepts that we distilled from interviewing hundreds of entrepreneurs. These are common and controllable factors that we distilled from hundreds of interviews of entrepreneurs, told through the story, through one man's story, through Clifton's story, as a young Black boy growing up in the Mississippi Delta in the Jim Crow South, and the influence of his Uncle Cleve, who owned the local ice house. And so we use this book to sort of bring out these core ideas about entrepreneurship. And then the Kauffman Foundation gave us an initial investment, program-related PRI, that helped us develop the curriculum around the book that's since launched around the world. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, what I want to emphasize here is, look, we'd love it if you use our curriculum or our materials or our book, and that's fine. But really what I want you to take away from this webinar is some ideas that will empower you to develop this mindset in yourself and others. Whether or not you use our curriculum, I want to make this webinar valuable to you. So it's not just a sales pitch here. And there's 2 important ideas nested in this presentation. One is the idea of a mindset as a belief system, as a set of underlying values and assumptions that influence our behavior, mostly without our conscious awareness. That's one really important idea. The second is the idea of entrepreneurship as a means of optimizing engagement and unlocking human potential. Without getting into a lot of detail here, when you look at the data, the vast majority of students and workers are not engaged in learning and work. And Gallup has chronicled this for more than a decade. The longer students stay in school, the less engaged they become. 2/3 of workers in North America are not engaged in their work. The numbers are worse. It's 87% globally, right? But when we look at entrepreneurials, they're optimally engaged. They possess the attitudes and skills that not only enable them to adapt and thrive in the face of complexity and dynamism, but they possess the attitudes and skills that enable them to make a greater contribution to the organizations and the communities they inhabit. So that's really the ideas that I want to put forth here. So let's start with mindset, right? We all have a mindset, yet very few of us are aware of it, much less the ways in which it influences our behavior. As I said, mostly without our awareness. So there's two aspects of a mindset that I want to bring forth here. One is that our mindset can either hinder or enhance our ability to optimize whatever capabilities we have. As Warren Buffett put it, it's the output we get from the engine we have. And Warren Buffett put it this way, you can have a 400 horsepower engine, but your mindset is such that you only know how to get 100 horsepower of output. And then you got a guy over here with a 200 horsepower engine, but he knows how to get all 200 horsepower out of the engine. He's better off than a guy with the 400 horsepower engine. That's what we see in these average entrepreneurs. They're not necessarily academically inclined. They're not necessarily the sharpest tools in the shed. They know how to maximize the output from whatever the capabilities they might have. But I also want to talk about the mindset as this mechanism that tends to hinder our ability to adapt in the face of change, right? Those are the two important aspects of the mindset that I want you to think about. I also want to, it took me a long time to figure this out, but I really looked at the literature, and there's not a lot of structure around mindset. And it occurred to me that mindset is to an individual what culture is to a group. And so now we have the framework to talk about and think about mindset. So I'm going to use Edgar Schein's definition of culture. It's as a pattern of shared basic assumptions learned by a group as it solved its problems of external adaptation and internal integration that work well enough to be considered valid and therefore be taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems. Okay, it's a little bit clunky. I'm going to send you these slides at the end here, so fear not. But now let's look at the correlation to mindset, right? So here's how a mindset works. It's like, let's use this same analogy from culture. Level one, the iceberg, that's the visible artifacts and the observable behavior. Level two, explicit knowledge and espoused values. This is what we say is important to us. This is what we know that we know. The sun comes up in the east, 2 + 2 is 4. This is our conscious beliefs, explicit knowledge, and espoused values. Yet here's the thing. Level three is where our deeply held values and taken for granted assumptions reside. And in the study of culture, that's what creates the outcomes. The artifacts are the result of our deeply held cultural values. And our mindset works exactly the same way. What shows up on the surface is less likely to be driven by level two than it is to be driven by level three. This is what any economist would tell you, right? You can say you value one thing, but look at how people spend their time and resources and effort and money. And that'll tell you their true value system. Doesn't matter, we've all heard the phrase, like, what you do speaks so loudly, I cannot hear what you say. That's a good example of the way a mindset works. So I define a mindset as a pattern of beliefs, assumptions, and mental models learned by an individual that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore assumed, asterisk, to be the correct way to perceive, think, and feel. It's assumed at a deep level, and it's assumed at a level at which we may not be aware of these assumptions. So, for example, here's 5 critical dimensions of a mindset that we've identified. Perceived locus of control. Do I believe that I'm in control of my future, or that fate, luck, circumstances, powerful others are controlling my life, right? We're not walking around saying, hi, my name's Gary. I have an external locus of control. But if you listen to my language and watch my behavior, you'll be able to detect that relatively quickly. Am I intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated? Am I doing things for is the task the reward, or am I doing things to get rich or for prestige or what have you? Makes a huge difference in our ability to persist. Do I have a fixed or a growth orientation? Do I believe that my abilities are finite, or do I believe that I can develop my abilities through practice? This has an enormous unconscious influence on the type of goals we set for ourselves. Or do we have an optimistic or a pessimistic explanatory style? And perhaps most importantly, our perceived self-efficacy, which is our deeply held beliefs about our own capabilities. And here too, this not only has an enormous impact on the goals we set for ourselves, but also the extent to which we stick to those goals in the face of challenge. So that's a quick primer about what a mindset is and how it influences our behavior without our awareness. I want to talk a little bit of entrepreneurship as a means of empowerment, right? And I want to begin by saying that our ability to embrace an entrepreneurial mindset is limited by the ways in which we define it. And so many entrepreneurship education initiatives are modeled after the venture-backed high-growth model of entrepreneurship, which is all fine and good, except for the fact that only a tiny fraction, an infinitesimal fraction of all new ventures are started this way, right? Kauffman Foundation published some data that said less than a single % of all new ventures are created with venture capital. You know, the average business is started with less than $1,000. So what we have is the visibility versus representation issue at hand, right? Other programs are modeled after the small business management version of entrepreneurship, in which they often treat the aspiring entrepreneur as if the startup is a smaller version of a large corporation. And you know, it just doesn't really reflect the mindset and the methods of a typical entrepreneur. It's more steeped in managerial thinking than it is entrepreneurial. The problem with these kinds of programs is that they fail to distinguish between entrepreneurial thinking and managerial thinking. Entrepreneurial thinking is essential for the discovery of useful things. Managerial is essential for the exploitation of useful things, for the replication and distribution of those useful things. So without getting into any more detail on this, it took me about 25 years to come up with this definition. But I now define entrepreneurship as the self-directed pursuit of opportunities to create value for others. By creating value for others, we empower ourselves. And I like this definition because it's simple, it's straightforward. Anyone can embrace this. You don't have to do a startup. If anyone who understands this fundamental idea that the more useful we become, the better off we're likely to be. And the more useful we become, the more empowered we are likely to become. And so a question I like to ask, audiences is, what's preventing you from making yourself more useful to more humans? And that's a question that's meant to just bring your level 3 assumptions up to level 2 so that we can examine them, right? What's preventing you from making yourself more useful to more humans? When we look at entrepreneurial attitudes and skills, we see the overlap between 21st century skills. Like the entrepreneurial skills are 21st century skills. That's the basic idea here. These are skills that anyone can develop. These are attitudes and skills that anyone can embrace, whether they work in a McDonald's or a fast food restaurant, or they want to change the world. These are attitudes and skills that our systems of education have historically undervalued, overlooked, discouraged, or ignored. But the big idea here is that the desire to fulfill human needs through our own effort is an essential part of what makes us human. And the entrepreneurial discovery process creates a very powerful intrinsic motivation to learn. If you don't hear me say anything else today, like that's it. The entrepreneurial mindset, the entrepreneurial process creates a very, very powerful incentive to learn. So I think of it this way in terms of flow, which is a borrowing here from the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. In flow, and what he's saying is that here's our current reality, and there's a compelling goal. I would also like to add that the compelling goal is really the central idea here. It's the compelling goal that distinguishes the entrepreneur from the non-entrepreneur. So another sort of level 3 question I'm going to ask rhetorically is, do you have a compelling goal? To be compelled means to be irresistibly pulled. Do you have a goal, something you're striving to achieve, something on the horizon that has meaning and purpose in your life? And if the question is no, or if you struggle with that question, you should also ask yourself, why not? What Csikszentmihalyi points out is that when the challenge greatly exceeds our skill level, we become anxious, right? By contrast, when our skill level exceeds the challenge, we become bored and disengaged. As I said, the vast majority of students and workers are not engaged in learning and work. What this translates to, in my view, is this colossal, this vast reservoir of untapped human potential that's like hiding in plain sight. When we look at entrepreneurial people, what we see are people who are optimally engaged. We've talked about that a little bit. This is just a graphic representation to help do that. And I see someone raise their question in chat. Maybe I'll get to that in a second. So I want to end this first part of the webinar by talking about what we see in an entrepreneurial mindset. Let's look back at these 5 dimensions. When we see entrepreneurial people, they tend to have an internal locus of control, a deeply held, mostly unconscious belief or assumption that the future is up to me. It's up to me to make things happen. They tend to be intrinsically motivated. There's a purpose behind their activity. They're not just motivated by money. The literature is pretty clear here that people who are intrinsically motivated tend to outperform people who are extrinsically motivated. They tend to be growth oriented. They tend to have an increased sense of optimism. And lastly, they have an increased sense of self-efficacy. Now, the point here is that the entrepreneurial mindset is an effect rather than the cause of entrepreneurial behavior. I'm going to say that again. The entrepreneurial mindset, which I just showed here, the internal locus of control, intrinsic motivation, growth orientation, increased optimism, and increased self-efficacy, is the result of entrepreneurial activity. So I'm going to stop here for questions. I think we're right about on time, Nick. Any
doing great on
questions,
time.
comments in the chat? I'd love to hear it.
No one has added anything quite yet. Demaxa, if you wouldn't mind adding your comment to the chat or the Q&A function, and I can read that out so everyone can hear it and see it, that would be great.
And if there are no, questions or comments at this time, we don't need to force the issue. We can just keep going.
Let's give it another 30. We can give it another, 15, 30 seconds just to let folks type if they have something on their mind.
Yeah. How are these ideas resonating with you? Do they contrast with your view of entrepreneurship? Do they, do they jive with your?
Great question from Gabriel. Hi, does what compels someone have to be a noble idea, or can just plain survival be a reason to be compelled?
Yeah, 100%, Gabriel. Survival can be a compelling goal. There's one of the entrepreneurs comes to mind that's in the Ice House program, Ted Moore. Guy was raised by a single mom with 11 kids. It was all about survival for Ted in the beginning. The compelling goal can indeed be survival. So that's a great question, a great distinction. Entrepreneurship lifts people out of poverty as a survival mechanism, 100%. And, big thinkers are starting to recognize what I would call the developmental benefits of entrepreneurship. Like historically, we've only looked at the economic benefits of entrepreneurship, but to the individual, to the organization, to the society, the communities they inhabit. But just now we're starting to see people like the OECD publish things. I'm seeing scholars publish papers about the developmental aspects of entrepreneurial activities. Very, very important. The self-efficacy beliefs, the creative, the critical thinking, the resilience, as a way to close the income gap. There's to lift people out of poverty. It's really, really important. A comment here.
Definitely. All right. Well, we will have time at the end for questions as well. So in the interest of respecting everyone's time, let's keep this train rolling, Gary.
Sounds good, Nick. I got to figure out how to close that. All right, let me see here. Get that going. Okay, so let me talk about the Ice House program a little bit, how it's structured, whether you use our program or not, that's irrelevant or secondary cause here. We now have 4 versions of the Ice House program. We have the original edition. We have a student success version that's meant for high schools, juniors, seniors, early students at college, incoming freshmen, to help them understand how to embrace entrepreneurial thinking, to succeed in school and in life. We have a small business edition for people who have, signed up to start a business. And in the last few years, we also developed a middle school edition after a very successful 1,000-student pilot in Erie, Pennsylvania. Talk a little bit more about that at the end. So there are 4 editions. They all are based on the same core concepts. They're not that, they're just modified slightly to meet different audience needs. It's real simple. We introduced these 8 core entrepreneurial competencies that we distilled from this ethnographic type research, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs. We then immerse the learner in the opportunity discovery process. That's the entrepreneurial process. We also call it the opportunity discovery process. We expose the learner to relatable social models. This is part of our secret sauce. Like when this is well established in the behavioral literature, when we're trying to get someone to adopt a new behavior, exposure to people who have come from similar or worse circumstances goes a long way to helping them, encouraging them to adopt this behavior. So what I'm saying here is, unless you're teaching at Stanford, stop talking about Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk or Henry Ford or Thomas Edison, and expose them to people who have come from similar or worse circumstances. And we also encourage personal reflection, and this goes back to my mindset model. We want to encourage the students to think about their own thinking. How are their level 3 deeply held beliefs and taken for granted assumptions contributing to the outcomes in their lives? That's super important. That's how you learn to get all the horsepower out of whatever engine you might have. And then we also encourage facilitation rather than instruction. Like, traditional teaching methods do not work for entrepreneurship. Why is that? We have to rely on intrinsic motivation. And in order to do so, we must also recognize the ways in which, overly invasive instruction and the ways in which other directed, routinized learning methods interfere with one's ability to develop entrepreneurial attitudes and skills. So we have to let go of our role as subject matter experts and adopt the role of the facilitator. We're the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. Another way to think about this is, like, we have no idea what they're going to discover in the process. All we can do is play the role of a motivator, of an inspirer, of a mentor or an advisor. So let me just walk you through very quickly through these 8 core competencies, right? This is what we've observed from interviewing hundreds of entrepreneurs. Starts with choice. What we see in entrepreneurs is they articulate a vision. There's something they're striving to achieve, which means they're just less likely to allow their circumstances to dictate their life. They've got a goal, and they're choosing their way forward. I wish I had more time to get into the research around this, but it's nothing short of astonishing. When we're striving to accomplish something, our brains are able to access problem-solving abilities that are otherwise not available to us. What we also see in entrepreneurs is they tend to look at problems as potential opportunities, right? They look at problems, frustrations, and unmet needs, where most of us just don't pay attention to that. We tend to avoid problems or frustrations, or we just like to complain with each other about problems, frustrations, or unmet needs, where the entrepreneur looks for them and approaches them, seeing the potential solution to these problems, frustrations, and unmet needs as potential opportunities. We notice that entrepreneurs tend to be action-oriented. They don't spend a lot of time writing business plans or doing in-depth market research. That's the way of a manager in a large established organization, but that doesn't work for the typical aspiring entrepreneur. And it's this action orientation, what I call a go in order to know strategy. They micro experiment, they try lots of little things. They engage in what I like to call an error-based learning process. They try lots of things and they learn from the results. And once they find something that starts to work, they build on that. That's very, very different from the plan and pitch model that we see so often promoted. Write a business plan and go get a bank or an investor to give you money. That's not what a typical entrepreneur actually does. We also notice that entrepreneurs, while they may not be great students in the traditional sense, they're dialed in, they're self-directed learners, and they're learning mostly through non-traditional means, through informal and non-formal means. They're learning from audiobooks, YouTube videos, online courses. They're learning from a network of other entrepreneurs. They're learning from their own mistakes. The point is that their belief in their ability to find and solve problems creates this very powerful incentive to learn. They also tend to be very resourceful. They tend not to, focus on recreation and leisure. They tend to invest their discretionary time and effort, whatever that might be, on advancing their ideas, right? They learn to invest rather than spend their discretionary time and effort. They also learn to become reliable. And this is such a simple thing. What I hear over and over for entrepreneurs who are taking mundane ideas, but they're just delighting their customers. They're just going above and beyond to create an experience. I've interviewed entrepreneurs that started with a couple $100, like a cleaning business, that's generating millions of dollars in revenue per year and creating wealth for their family by simply focusing on delighting their customers. It's really, really easy to overlook, and it's so simple. It's right there. They also tend to surround themselves with other entrepreneurs. And while here again, I don't have time to get into the research, but Cervantes once said, like, tell me the company you keep and I'll tell you who you are. The people that we surround ourselves generally tend to reflect our own attitudes and beliefs. We tend to surround ourselves with people who think and act like we do, and that sort of creates a self-perpetuating paradigm. Whereas the entrepreneurs tend to immerse themselves in entrepreneurial communities. By doing so, they're surrounding themselves with other people who are growth-oriented, other people who have compelling goals, other people who are striving to make things happen in spite of their circumstances. Creates a very, very powerful network effect. And those of you who might want to geek out on this, I would suggest like Google searching some of the research Nicholas Christakis has done around the network effect and the profound impact not only our friends, but our friends' friends and our friends' friends' friends have on our attitudes and belief. And lastly, what we observed in entrepreneurs is they have this ability to persist. And many of them have told me, I just refuse to give up. And so where does that persistence come from? Underneath this sense of like this resilience or this ability to persist, to keep getting up after getting knocked down, comes from what psychologists call an optimistic explanatory style, right? It's basically the story they're telling themselves. So very briefly, those are the 8 core concepts. In our facilitator training program, we do a much deeper dive into those 8 core concepts and the research behind them. We then immerse the student, the learner, in the opportunity discovery process using what we call an opportunity discovery canvas. This is a derivative of Alexander Osterwalder's business model canvas. We've tried to simplify it and take the business vernacular out of it. But we've also looked at the entrepreneurial process and divided it into sort of 3 basic phases. It begins with exploration. There's this inquiry, this problem finding phase. And I think that's perhaps the most overlooked a piece of the puzzle in the entrepreneurship, in the discourse around entrepreneurship, right? Problem finding is probably 90% of it because the problems are tacit. They're not they're not tasked. What's the word I'm looking for? They're unarticulated, unexpressed needs, right? People aren't walking around with a placard saying, I need this or I need that. They're deeply held needs of which the user themselves might not be aware, right? So for example, 1981 and Starbucks is just taking off. Coffee is 40 cents at a lunch counter. No one is talking about a $4 latte. And if you had surveys, Schultz, in fact, if he had written a business plan, the data showed at that time that coffee consumption in the United States was in steep decline. So the problem finding part of this is really kind of tricky, and it's often overlooked. So many programs just start with the solution. Anyways, I digress. The second phase is once we find the problem we're solving, then we begin to experiment with a solution, right? And we're searching for evidence of usefulness. It's an important point here. So, that's really in box 6 here. Like, how do you know what is evidence that your idea is useful? That's the key here. The entrepreneurial discovery process is an evidence-based process. It's not gambling. It's not fortune telling. In fact, it really emulates the scientific method. And so the third phase, once you have evidence of usefulness, then you go into the execution phase where you advocate and implement your idea. So problem finding, problem solving is this iterative experimental process. Once evidence of usefulness is found, then you go big. If you look at the scientific method, it starts with background research, then moves to hypothesis and experiment, and then replication and communication, right? That's what these underdog, these everyday unfunded entrepreneurs tend to follow this path. And we developed this canvas to help immerse students in the process. So the next idea is exposing them to relatable social models. And we've got a whole variety of people that come from all manner of adversity and challenges and backgrounds to help reinforce the core concepts. And there's little video vignettes in our curriculum, these short little videos where the key concepts are reinforced with the firsthand testimony of these everyday entrepreneurs. We then encourage the personal reflection, as I said before, to connect the mindset. If you don't like what's coming out, I like to put it like this. A mindset is a belief system that is perfectly designed to create the outcomes that it's creating. So since we launched the Ice House program, it has taken off in ways that we could never have predicted. The Kauffman Foundation described the Ice House program as redefining entrepreneurship in classrooms and communities worldwide. We have since trained more than 3,200 facilitators around the world. We've got a map on our website. You can click on all these little things and you can connect with these facilitators. The program's being embraced in community colleges where it's had an enormous impact on student success. That's the student success version of the program. This is from the middle school program in Erie, Pennsylvania. This is out of the mouths of a 7th grade student. If we can think about how we can change problems into opportunities, we can make Erie a better place. What Madison's comment reflects to me is what I said earlier, is that the desire to fulfill human needs through our own effort is an essential part of what makes us human. Not everybody wants to start a business, but we're all inherently born with the innate proclivity to want to solve problems, to be engaged in work that matters, and to see our effort lead to something better. Like, that's just human nature. And so in that regard, the entrepreneurial spirit, in my view, is the human spirit. We've also had great success with our work in workforce development. I mean, the mindset is really the missing link to help displaced workers reinvent themselves and shift their thinking away from the unconscious assumption that someone else needs to tell me what to learn and do in order to be useful, and shift that to a more internal locus of control. How can I take my talent, interests, and abilities and make myself more useful to more humans? Another way in which the program was adopted that I never could have predicted was within organizational culture. And one example here is the Albuquerque, the city of Albuquerque city government. And they're now in the process, thanks to this phenomenal facilitator, Tom Darling, they're in the process of 6,000 city government workers are in the process of going through the Ice House program. The impact this has had on the city of Albuquerque is not only increasing worker engagement, but also like finding all these great ways to save the city money and to do things more efficiently. We started with an initial pilot of 100, and the mayor of Albuquerque was so enamored with the outcome that they now committed to all employees. And then when we're talking about entrepreneurial communities, creating entrepreneurial ecosystems, that's another place that our work has been embraced. One such organization is called, oh, come on, help me out here, Nick. Went right out of my North Carolina. God.
NCID.
Thank you, Nick. Wow, drew a blank there. NCIDEA is a nonprofit foundation in North Carolina. They've committed to putting 100,000 North Carolinians through the Ice House Entrepreneurship Program. That's ranging from middle schools, high schools, community colleges, four-year universities, nonprofit organizations. I think they've trained more than 250 facilitators statewide. So those are just some examples of the ways in which our programs are being used. So I'm just going to wrap this up. In addition to the Ice House program, we offer a whole variety of trainings, professional development, organizational development, keynotes, workshops. We have 4 public Ice House facilitator trainings every year. I think the next one's coming up in November. We also tend to do these. We get hired by organizations, academic institutions, and organizations to come and do these trainings in-house. We've done them all over the world, organizations in Latin America, South Africa, Europe, as well as across the United States. That's what we do. Our next training, as I said, it starts in November. All the information about that particular event, you can register or learn more about it on our website, and Nick will provide you with a follow-up there. I know we've only got a few minutes left. I'm happy to stay late if you guys want to hang out to address whatever questions or comments you might have. So I'm going to stop sharing and just—
Sure. I'll start. The first question that we've got is one that I'll take on. Hi, Eva. So all of our trainings are online, but they're in a blended format. So they're over the course of 4 weeks. Our next training starts, I want to say it's November 5th. But regardless, this next series of November 4th, I'm sorry. So that's each Friday throughout the month of November. We take, because of the Thanksgiving holiday here in the States, we do take one of those Fridays off. So it will actually be ending December 2nd. So basically what that looks like is it's a 2-hour live session via Zoom, very similar to what we're doing here, except it's a lot more interactive. We'll have the participants engaging in discussion with us, Q&A throughout, very, very little lecture, more discussion based, lots of breakout rooms, things of that nature. And then we have pre-recorded content that you watch in between those live sessions. So that's kind of priming the pump, if you will, for conversations and questions that you might have. And like Gary mentioned, we have folks from academic facilitators, we have folks from city governments, such as Tom Darling that we were just talking about a moment ago, and a whole host of other folks, including, life coaches, things of that nature. So there's something for everyone in the training. Yeah. Any other questions of the last few minutes that we have? Gary, would you be willing to elaborate more on error-based learning versus plan and pitch models?
Yeah. Okay, that's a big question. I'm going to dive into it, and hopefully I don't offend anyone here. Plan and pitch, it's the Shark Tanky kind of method. Let me just first start with this. It's not what entrepreneurs do. If you look at the data, the typical entrepreneur is starting with less than $1,000. They're cobbling a few hundred or a few $1,000s together from friends, fools, and family, credit cards, whatever, personal savings. But here's the important point. The underlying level 3 assumptions of plan and pitch are that you can figure it all out, and that money before you act, and that money is actually the only missing thing. And that's the inherent flaw in the assumption. For the aspiring entrepreneur, access to money is actually detrimental. Why? Because access to money allows you to lurch forward and adopt a build it and they will come mentality that is more akin to gambling than it is to opportunity discovery. I hope that makes sense. So the error-based learning, what I'm really trying to say here is really so counterintuitive. Hang with me here. The lack of resources for the typical aspiring entrepreneur actually works to their advantage. It forces them to start where they are and use what they have to prove their ideas on live customers. And so what they're doing is essentially embracing a customer validated approach, right? I started a business in my 20s cleaning gutters. I didn't write a business plan. I didn't go and do all kinds of market research. My market research was I borrowed a ladder from a friend of mine. I strapped it on the roof of my car, and I went into wealthy neighborhoods to see if someone would pay me $100 to clean their gutters out. And lo and behold, someone did. And that evolved into a different business through iteration and experimentation, the error-based learning. You're trying things, but you're trying them on a small scale, and you're learning from the feedback loop. That's very, very different from plan and pitch. Plan and pitch is what they do in large corporations where the market is known, the customer is known, the brand is known, there's availability of resources. That's all fine and good within a large corporation. That's not what entrepreneurs do. So I hope that answered the question. That's really a great question to ask, and I'm grateful that you did.
And Gabriel says, thank you. That was helpful. Eva is asking, how is this program offered in middle school? Are after school or integrated into a curriculum? That's a great question, Eva. Primarily, so for example, in the Erie public schools example, it was integrated into all or most social studies programs across at the time it was 4 middle schools. I think they've now condensed into 3 since we initially started that pilot. But yeah, it was integrated into the social studies program. And as such, when we developed the middle school edition with the assistance of that and one of those primary facilitators from there, a lot of the supplementary materials that we have are geared towards a kind of social studies or civics based approach. So it's great because it applies these concepts beyond business startup. It's not an extracurricular or an elective class. It's actually something that's fully integrated into the curriculum that they're already going to be learning.
Yep. And you know, to go back to Gabriel's question about error-based learning versus plan and pitch, when you think about it, when we observe these everyday entrepreneurs, there's a term that comes to mind, which is biomimicry. What they're doing is the same thing that an organism does to orient itself in unfamiliar terrain. And the question we should really ask of all of our children, all of our students, all of our workers, is we should immerse them in an experience where they have to learn how to make themselves useful to other humans without the guidance of a professional teacher, a predetermined curriculum with a predictable outcome. That's how they develop the attitudes and skills the world now demands. So I think we're just about at time here, Nick.
Yes.
And if any other questions, I'm happy to hang out. If not, I'm grateful for you all spending an hour with us this afternoon or this morning or wherever you are in the world. And if we can do anything else to help support your entrepreneurship education initiatives, please do not hesitate to reach out. Nick will send a follow-up email within 24 hours or so with the slides in this presentation, a recording of the presentation, a link to the next training. You can learn more at our website, which is elimindset.com. That's elimindset.com.
Yes, and if you do have any other questions, feel free to respond to that follow-up email as well. That's an easy way for me to keep things top of mind. Thank you all so much. And as Gary said, look for that email from me in the next 24 hours. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.